All right, hey, we're going to do the urinary system today. I need you to know all these parts and functions. Of course, this is going to be real helpful on the final if you watch the video when we get to the topic of how does the urinary system work and the nephrons. Anyway, the four basic components. We have kidneys, which we have two of. We have two ureters. And the ureters are the tubes that carry it down. We have one urinary bladder. And we have urethra. And we have one of those. Now, the kidneys are located on the lower retroperitoneal region of the back of the peritoneal cavity, just right here at the bottom of your ribs, the floating ribs covering them. The kidneys, the major function of the kidneys is to remove nitrogenous waste or nitrogen-based waste from the bloodstream. So there is a heck of a blood supply going into the kidneys. So when you look at a kidney, you will see the red vessel coming in the hilum region of the kidney, which is this curved indented part. We have the renal artery, and then the blood flow going back out of the kidney is the renal vein. Now, the kidneys in a human are a lot smaller than my model, but it gives you the general purpose, and you can probably see it better on the video. Now, the kidneys usually have about 1 to 2 million little microscopic nephrons. And this model shows a nephron. It has a little ball here, a glomerular capsule, with a complex capillary system inside. It's like a little ball of capillaries inside the capsule that we call the glomerulus. So the glomerular capsule surrounds the glomerulus, and then the filtrate or the liquid portions and the small molecules that leave the bloodstream go through this tubule system that we call a nephron. Now, the ureter comes out of the kidney. This thick region is the renal pelvis, and then it does a tube that runs on down to the urinary bladder. So as each drip of urine is produced by the kidneys, it is drained through the ureter down into the bladder so that we can store that and not have urine dripping out of our system constantly. So it's kind of the duct or the tubule that's going to transport the urine from the kidney down to the urinary bladder. Now, the urinary bladder, when void of urine, is very difficult to find, but it's right on the base of the peritoneal cavity here in the lower pelvis, right here above the pubic bone. Now, as the bladder fills up, this stretching effect is what triggers the response for micturition or need to urinate. The urethra is the tube that connects to the bladder on out to the external environment. And there is slight differences between male and female with this aspect of the urinary system. Everything else is the same. But the urethra on a male is longer because of the penis. So therefore, you have about a 5 to 7 inch pathway through the urethra in a male. Where in female, it's only about 1.5 inches or so. So it's a much shorter entryway into the body. This is one of the reasons, because of the short nature of the urethra in a female, that urinary tract infections are much more common. But these are your four basic parts, and so the function of the urethra in both males and females is to excrete or eliminate the urine that's been stored in the bladder whenever we find an appropriate situation to urinate. Now, there is one slight difference in the urethra of the male. It has a second function, and that is for the delivery of sperm in an ejaculation for reproduction, which will be the next videos that we will go off on following the urinary system. So these are your four basic parts. Know them, be able to recognize them, and know their function. Now, when we start looking at the cross-section of the kidney, it looks something like this in its cross-section. You see these distinct areas here that the collecting ducts of the nephrons run through, which is illustrated by this white duct here. These are called the renal pyramids. In between, there's a fleshy tissue here they call the renal columns. The outside layer, starting at the edge of the pyramids here, going around, is the renal cortex, or the outside layer of the kidney. Then with the renal pyramids going on down through the calyces, all this inner region is known as the renal medulla. And the entire kidney is surrounded in a tough, almost leather-like consistent structure that we call the renal capsule. And that helps anchor it to the back of the peritoneal cavity in our bodies. Now, the minor calyces are these little open tubes here that collect all the drips of urine from the nephrons and channel that into the major calyx, or the major calyces. And these major calyces run together and form this thick region right here known as the renal pelvis. A real common site for kidney stones to form in this location. But as that renal pelvis begins to narrow down, that becomes the ureter, which runs on down and drains into the bladder to fill it up. So this is your basic parts of the inside of your kidney and your two layers with the renal cortex and the renal medulla. Now, when we start looking within the kidney, we have these microscopic structures. And I was telling you the glomerulus, which is like a capillary ball. It's a series of intricately small blood vessels or capillaries that is surrounded by a capsule here that we call the renal capsule, or glomerular capsule. Used to be known as Bowman's capsule, but now it's just referred to as the glomerular capsule. Now, going after the filtrate is collected by that glomerular capsule, it channels it through a tubule system that looks something like this. Now, as the filtrate exits here and is collected, it begins its journey on down through the tubule system. And each region has different names. So this is known as the proximal convoluted tubule. That's where a lot of the water and materials are going to be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream so we don't lose it in our urine. Small molecules such as glucose, some amino acids, some of our minerals. As the filtrate goes on down, it hits this large loop, and we call that the nephron loop. The nephron loop has a descending limb, which is where the filtrate is going to go down. Then it's going to start its journey upward in what we call the ascending limb. And we'll talk about the differences, what happens physiologically in a second. We then enter the distal convoluted tubule, and then that urine or filtrate exits, and once it goes on down the collecting duct, which is this structure here, we call it urine. And that's going to then make its way down through the pyramids, through the minor calyces, into the major calyces, into the renal pelvis, and down the ureters to the urinary bladder. Now, different things occur with different regions of this glomerulus. And so when it comes down to the functions, I'd like you to know there's a couple major hormones involved. The two major hormones involved are antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, and aldosterone. And it's these two hormones that are released into the bloodstream that really regulate water balance and salt balances, or electrolyte balances. This one's known as the sodium hormone, aldosterone. This is released from our adrenal gland. Now, ADH, remember, is produced in our hypothalamus and is stored in our posterior pituitary. And it is our posterior pituitary that dumps ADH, which basically causes us to become much more water conservative, or to reabsorb more water out of this filtrate so that we do not lose that in the urine, or we concentrate the urine. As we start the journey of the filtrate through this loop, we will find that some of the molecules are now going to be starting to exit. So the thing I haven't depicted here is this whole nephron itself, which is microscopic, is surrounded by a complex capillary system. And I can't draw capillaries worth crap, so just pretend that you can see capillaries surrounding this. So when the materials do begin to exit, like water molecules and other molecules, glucose, some of these different amino acids, all are going to start to exit. Now, as that filtrate goes down the descending limb, here's where aldosterone is going to start to play an effect. So aldosterone is going to start to pull out sodium ions and other minerals or electrolytes out of the filtrate. So when the urine begins, or its filtrate begins its journey upward to ascending limb, there's going to be a natural diffusion for water to go out of the filtrate to basically an area of low concentration where we have a high concentration of salt. So to dilute that down, water is going to be pulled out. So sodium is going to be pulled out on the descending limb. Water is going, which is a result of aldosterone's action, and then the water is going to naturally follow it out. Stop right there.